Heavenly Father, we come before you today asking for your guidance in this lesson as you are the one that has given it to us. You're the one that has preserved it all these years for us to study. There's much to learn, as we have seen in these chapters this week, but we want to really understand what it is that you would have us to take from this lesson and how it should change our lives and how it should change how we deal with suffering and we deal with suffering for others as well. So we just ask for your guidance and we thank you for it in advance. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, this is lesson 6 of our lessons. We only have 2 more weeks in the book of Job. And this week, we were 100% only hearing from Job. Tilt that a little bit, which was kind of interesting and kind of refreshing, I will say. But to remember why we're here and where we are, we started out in chapters 1 and 2, which seems like a long time ago, where there was a conversation that God initiated with Satan about like where he was and have you considered my servant Job? And we kind of joke sometimes, but we, in all seriousness, need to realize that's, you know, I don't want Satan to be looking at me, right? I don't want him to be thinking about me. But God had a purpose and he had a plan. And God said of Job that he was righteous, blameless, righteous, upright, and turned away from evil, that he had integrity, that what Satan had done to Job by taking everything away, God said was without cause. It's important to remember that because after that, we see Job's response, and then of course Satan actually got to touch Job himself and affect his health. But Job's response was to worship, to grieve, but to worship. And he did not allow himself to use words to sin, which is incredible. But we've also seen Job's response, which is in many ways normal, um, very human. If we didn't see that aspect inside of Job, this would just be unbelievable. Like it would be unrelatable. Like how could we ever be like that, right? So to see Job struggle, um, and then, as I said last week, I just got tired of these friends. I can only imagine how tired Job is of these friends and the friends' lack of compassion, lack of support, lack of sympathy, not giving him good counsel at all is part of Job's suffering. It adds to it, it increases it, it highlights it, it brackets it. There's all kinds of ways that we could look at that. But we did see a pattern. We saw Job speak, and then we saw Eliphaz, then Bildad, then Zophar. And between each one, we saw Job. Job was responding. So there's this back and forth throughout. And then there were 3 rounds of that. And in the last round, it will ended with Bildad. Zophar does not speak again. And that's where we ended last week. We ended in chapter 25 with Bildad saying something that has been said before: how can a man be just before God? It is a question, it's a valid question. We have an answer to that. Job had already mentioned a redeemer, so Job has an answer to this, had already spoken to it. So, but prior to this, Job has said of his friends that they are not good counselors, that they are sorry counselors, I guess is one way to put it. That I'm trying to think of some of the word: miserable, sorry. And he has said of himself that his spirit is broken, he's bitterness of soul. He longs for death. He wishes he had never been born. He also longs for an answer. He longs to hear from God. Um, And yet he also prays to God. He speaks directly to God. He speaks of God as well. And so do the friends. It's not that everything the friends said is wrong. There are things they've said that we can take and go, yeah, I agree with that. It's really more how they applied it and what conclusions they drew. And it has been said by David in his videos, but it's also been said in some of the commentaries. They stick to what's called the retribution principle, which is the another way of putting it is sowing and reaping. You know, what you sow, you will reap. And that is a principle. It is a principle in the Word of God that if you sow to destruction, you're going to reap destruction. And you're going to reap whatever you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly, but whatever you sow bountifully, you're going to reap bountifully. There's plenty of precautions throughout the Word of God on that same idea, but was something that goes from one, linearly, in a linear way, from, sowing to reaping doesn't necessarily come back. In other words, um, yes, if you have sinned, you will face some consequences for that. But just because you're facing something that might look like a consequence, but it might not be a consequence, might not be an effect of a cause, which is what they're applying to Job. They've reversed the principle and said, since you are suffering, you must have sinned. This is a consistent message, and they will not turn from it at all. So, in this last message from Bildad, where he says, um, that how then can a man be just with God? He says that in verse 4, or how can he be clean who is born of a woman? It's a very short verses in the way it's laid out here. And you can just imagine he thinks this is the final argument. He thinks that he has summed it up. He's very short and very sweet, and he thinks that this is the last, right? But it is something that also Job has said. How can a man be just before God? It is something that can be asked and should be asked. But now we look this week at Job's response, not just to Bildad, directly to Bildad, directly really to all of them, especially when he uses words that help us to understand it's not singular but plural you. Um, and he goes on and on. And they do not speak again. It doesn't say at the end of Bildad, it does not say this is the last of their words. But when we finish chapter 31, we do see these are the last of Job's words. Um, and then we're going to hear from somebody else next week called Elihu. So as I said, we can imagine that when Bildad gave his final statement, it was, he thought he had really summarized it, thinking people, men, women are lower than worms. And then you've got um, you had one of the other patterns we saw is that they started out kind of nice and giving some hope, and then over time that just basically went away. In Eliphaz's last speech, it kind of looks like he's giving hope, but he's basically giving a prescription, and it fits everything they've said all along, which is you must have done something wrong, yield, return, remove unrighteousness, then you will be restored. And so we know what they've been their speeches have been characterized by, or discourses, or whatever you want to call them. I call them speeches. But okay, so as we get into chapter 26, starting this week, we see Job's response. And I can't read this or think of this without a lot of just weightiness, like tiredness to his voice, right? This is not, I don't think he's fresh at this point. And yet he goes on and on. I don't mean it's a bad on and on. It's just he has a lot to say. He's not done. And one of the things that we've seen of Job consistently is that he's holding forth his integrity. He will not admit to something he has not done. He will not confess just to make them stop. We talked about that last week. The tendency, the um, temptation would be to do that, just to say, um, just cave, give in, basically agree with them to make them go away. But he will not do that. And honestly, it had not really occurred to me till we were in this discussion last week to to say what I actually said, which is if he had caved, then he would have been misrepresenting God. If he had agreed with them just to make them go away, then he would have left them with that retribution principle and the wrongness of how they were applying it. And sometimes, even if it's hard, sometimes, even if it's going to draw more fire to ourselves, we've got to stick to the truth, not just give in to people to get peace and get them to go away, because we have to care to continue and train and teach to those people as well. And they're going to hear from God. So they're going to know how wrong they are, but also realize that in our setting, that's not how it happens. Like, we are the only voice, besides reading the Bible to them, which is the voice of God. We are the only one giving voice to it. Chances are, I can't say it'll never happen, but chances are God's not going to show up and speak out loud, which we know is going to happen with Job. So, how important is it? You got to ask yourself, I'm asking myself, how important is it that we hold on to the truth, that we speak truth into very difficult situations, difficult people? How hard is it to maintain your integrity, but maintain the integrity of the Word of God? And it's hard sometimes. Okay, so in the first paragraph of chapter 26, we see Job's beginning to respond, and he says, what a help you are to the weak. How you have saved the arm without strength. What counsel you have given to one without wisdom. What helpful insight you have abundantly provided. To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit was expressed through you? So once again, I'm going to say this. This is sarcasm. There's no other way to read this. And I say that because, not that I'm advocating sarcasm all the time, but sarcasm is a tool sometimes to make your point. It's very similar to being hyperbolic, giving way over the top, very exaggerated statements on purpose, and everybody recognizes them as hyperbole. If they don't use that word, they still recognize them as an exaggeration because you're making a point. And his point here is what? When he is saying these things this way, he's saying it to Bildad, but he's saying it to all three. What's his point?
What good are you?
Yeah, right. You haven't done any of the things I just said. Right. And so what good are you? As you said before, you're miserable counselors. You have shown me no sympathy, no comfort. And here he's saying, you what counsel you have given to one without wisdom. So he's putting himself in that, as if he has no wisdom and they're the ones giving counsel to him. But what insight, helpful insight. So everything he's saying here is basically the opposite. Um, They haven't been helpful. They do not have insight. They've not given counsel. He is not unwise. They've not saved him. And it's not that he has no strength, but in a way he is, and he is weak, but he's not weak. He might physically be down, but he's not a weak person. And and whose spirit was expressed through you? That's a huge one. It could literally be translated, um, and whose breath has gone forth. We know that God's word is God breathed. So if it was God that breathed through them, if his spirit is the one speaking through them, they're right. And, they've invoked visions, they've invoked spirit before in things they've said, as if it gives credence to what they say. If it gives some weightiness, it gives some validity to what he said. Thus saith the Lord. They're not saying that, but it's as if they're speaking for God. And that's where we've got to be very careful. You've probably heard somebody say stuff like that, and hopefully it's not often. It's not often for me, but there are times when I've heard people basically saying that what they're saying is from God. Now, if it's reading the word of God, that's one thing. But even then, Satan quotes scripture, but he quotes it incorrectly and applies it incorrectly. So we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we're not taking some proof text and making our point with it when we haven't really understood what that text says. So he's being very sarcastic here. And then he goes on, in verses 5 through the rest of the chapter, 5 through 14, and he talks about the works of God, right? So what God does, he stretches out the north over empty spaces. There's some amazing statements in here, and we have to stop and think from a man prior to telescopes, prior to, you know, um, observation centers that study the stars. In some ways, they probably could see the stars better than us because of lack of ambient light, the city lights or whatever. And if it's dark there, so they can see the stars. But apparently, there's some knowledge that he has of the expanse of the heavens and how it got there, how God placed things. When he's saying he stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. We know this is true. How did Job know that was true? He knows his God. That's the one thing we can draw from this. We don't know where he got his information. We don't know, other than later he literally hears from God. Maybe prior to what happened to him, he heard from God. I don't know. But because we don't know that, I'm not saying that's absolutely true because I don't know. And then it says he wraps up the waters in his clouds. The cloud does not burst under them. I mean, that's fascinating, right? If Job can understand, so I would think, I mean, Job's got to be post Noah because Noah, and there was no rain prior to Noah and the ark. That came about after. And so Job understands that the clouds hold the moisture. And he's saying it in such a way that, yes, it rains from clouds, but he's saying that he wraps up the waters in the clouds. And that's the evaporation process that we understand. And those clouds are heavy, but they don't burst. So he understands that. And then he says, he obscures the face of the full moon and spreads his cloud over it. We understand the phases of the moon. We look outside and we see that little sliver, sometimes the crescent. We understand that that's the earth blocking the sun because the moon has no light of its own. The moon is reflecting the light of the sun. We know that. I don't know how Job would know this, but he still credits it to God. And he said, he has ascribed a circle on the surface of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. He understands there are boundaries to light and dark. Oh, he experiences day and night, but he's attributing this to God. The pillars of heaven tremble and are amazed at his rebuke. He quieted the sea with his powers, and by understanding, he shattered Rahab. That would be probably Rahab would probably refer to some sea creature, sea monster or something. By his breath, the heavens are cleared. No, his hand has pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are the fringes of his ways. So all that he says in this paragraph can be summarized by that statement. These are just the fringes. These are just a little bit about what God does and is capable of. Just the fringes. I love that statement. I'm trying to come up with something that we would say similar, but I love this one. It's just the fringes of his ways, and how faint a word we hear of him, but his mighty thunder, who can understand? So Job is saying, look at all Job understands about God, and yet he's still saying, who can really understand him? We can't. We know that. We've got all of this, and we've got tools, and we've got computers, and we've got resources at our fingertips, and we've got some, people we can listen to and that have studied longer than us, and we've got books and books and books, of things that Job didn't have. And yet we all still have to conclude, who can really fully understand him? We can't understand God's ways. And Job is applying that, I believe, to his situation. God is, because he's credited God all along. He's come real close to blaming God sometimes in a way that he shouldn't, but he gives God credit. God is sovereign. If you get one thing out of the book of Job, get that. God is sovereign. There's other things we can get from the book of Job, but that's one. And then in 27, he goes on and he says, and it even says, Job continued his discourse. This is where it's called a discourse, and said, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has embittered my soul. So again, he's talking about himself being embittered. So we've got Job talking, we've got sarcasm towards the friends who aren't, and I'm just going to put dot, 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 they aren't doing the things they should be doing. And then he does a whole talk on the fringes of God's ways. And then also, who can understand? And in a way, when I was doing the work this week and looking at these chapters, it's as if you could just look at these chapters and you would not understand much at all about Job's circumstances, surely, but you just how in the midst of what he's going through, in all that he lost, in the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual pain, this bitterness of soul that he is in, how he just this is amazing what he's saying. It's hard though to hear things like bitterness of soul, but he's being honest. Have you ever, you know, maybe not always in a group setting, told everything? Like we don't do that. It's not that we shouldn't trust. It's not that we shouldn't, help let others help us and give good prayers on our behalf. But there's also, just times for that. You don't necessarily tell everything and say everything, but how honest are we? Do we, when we especially if we're in a more one-on-one or one-on-few situation, do you ever actually admit that your soul is embittered? I mean, who are you fooling? You might fool the people, like you could fool me, but are you really fooling God? Job is very honest, very honest. Like I said, sometimes he's gone to the edge of probably shouldn't go there, but he's still God's not fooled by us saying, I'm just fine. It's all okay, you know. And he's also not Pollyanna, euphemistic. It's all going to work out. He doesn't say that. He's more along the lines of, it's not going to work out. I'm not going to see a resolution. I'm going to die and just go to my grave. And I'm not going to regain here in this life. I'm not going to, but he still wants his day in court. He still wants his time to speak to God. And then he also we got to remember, he knows his Redeemer lives, and he knows that his Redeemer is going to stand on earth, take a stand on earth. And he also knows he's going to look at his Redeemer in the flesh. So there's also that hope, that assurance, that assurance while he's still embittered of soul and saying that God has taken away his right. He said, as long as life is in me and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. This is again holding on to his integrity. Um, you can't agree with them about the things of the whys, especially of what's going on, because he knows that's not the way this works. He knows he did not do it's not a cause and effect. He did not sin to cause what happened to him. Far be it from me that I should declare you right. Won't declare them right. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days. So he holds fast his righteousness. I miss the till I die, I will not put away my integrity. So there's that righteousness and integrity. And, I've said it before, I said it earlier. I've said it about my situation with, members of my family. Um, I don't know where you stand on that. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it is hard to face over and over and over the again the progression. It starts with, usually the progression is, it starts with, let me tell you all the things they will say, let me tell you all the things that I admire about you, or these are the things that you have done so well, or these are the ways that you have treated me or treated people. That's how they start. But then there's a but, and then there's some problem that they perceive, or that they're telling you about something you've done wrong, or something that they wish you would do their way, or whatever it is. And if you won't, it gets nastier. This is the progression. And then it gets accusatory. They start saying things that are literally a contradiction of what they said in the beginning. Like, I have called them on it, going, how can I be both? How can I be this person with a great memory that doesn't lie, tells the truth, and has always been a good person, but now you're claiming everything I'm saying is a lie? And it's the progression, and it gets worse and worse. And their solution is you have to agree with them. And I have said this, I will agree when I can agree. Like, if they present something even in the midst of a mess, if they present something I could agree with, I will agree with it, but I will not compromise, especially on the things they're saying about me. I will not say, yeah, I'm that person. Yeah, I did those things. You're right. Those are that's what I planned. I planned to ruin you all. I had this plan. I'm gonna leave today, and I mean, this is what we were being accused of. You're gonna leave today, and you're gonna go down to the courthouse, and you're gonna do, and we're just sitting there going, how do you defend something you hadn't even thought of? How do you defend something that 10 years later you still haven't done, right? But they won't back down. I have to agree with them, or they're going to continue in this accusations and everything else. So I don't know if you've faced that. I will be honest with you, it boggles my mind, and I still argue against it. And then I'm in the book of Job going, he's describing what's happening to him is what it's not exactly, obviously, but what the progression, the pattern that they've done to Job is what I have faced. And I know I'm not the only one. It may not have happened to you. I don't want it to. I'm not wishing it on you so that you have to deal with this. Um, but this is what I told you my younger sister said is your problem is you won't agree with them. And it's this statement that Job is making. Far be it from me that I should declare you right. Till I die, I will not put my integrity from me. I hold fast to my righteousness and I will not let it go. And my heart does not reproach me any of my days. Now, I haven't said it that way, but I have said, God knows. And that's what I have to hold on to. God knows the truth. And I may never get my day in court in that sense. I may never be able to prove myself right in their eyes. Um, it may not happen in this lifetime, but I do know I will face God and he knows the truth, and they will face God and he knows the truth. So if that's true, hold fast to your integrity. So then in the next paragraph, which is 7 through 12, um, what does he say of his friends? The last verse tells you the question he asks of them. Yes, he kind of asks a bunch of questions, makes some statements. May my enemy be as the wicked and my opponent as the unjust. For what is the hope of the godless when he is cut off, when God requires his life? It's not the first time that Job has kind of warned them, and that was kind of Bildad's snapback response, because at the end of 24 Job is warning them and saying, God drags off, and he provides them with security, but he says, um, no one can prove me a liar and make my speech worthless. He's warning them to, and in other places, other times, Job is warning them that, God does know the truth, and they're going to be held accountable for what they have done or not done and said, especially about Job. And here he's saying kind of, you know, I don't know that he's calling them his enemy, but he's saying, may my enemy be as the wicked and my opponent as the unjust, and they're opposing him. For what is the hope of the godless? I don't know that he's calling them godless, but there's still some warning in here. Will God hear his cry when distress cometh upon him? Will he take delight? This is the godless, will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will instruct you in the power of God. What is the Almighty? What is with the Almighty? I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it. Why do you act foolishly? So I wrote up here. Job asked, why do his friends act foolishly? Um, there's a difference, though, in being foolish and being a fool. A fool is the one that says there is no God. A fool is declared in his heart, there is no God. Um, if you look through Proverbs, many times you'll see foolish and foolishness or foolishly like this. A child is, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and we're to drive it out of their hearts. We need to understand all of us can be foolish. You might have think back to the past week or month and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that or said that, or, and it might just be, it's minor stuff usually. Okay. We can all be foolish, but being a fool means that you don't divert from the foolishness, that you are all in as a fool, and a fool is unsaved. A fool is not a Christian, but a Christian can mess up and act foolishly at times. So he's saying of his friends, why do you act foolishly? Then he talks in 13 through the end of the chapter about the wicked. They've talked about the wicked, usually inferring things that Job is. And here Job is talking about the wicked. And maybe it's more of a contrast, or just they can agree on what's true of a wicked person. But he talks about this. This is the portion of a wicked man from God. And many things in here are, the inheritance which tyrants receive from the Almighty. His sons are many, they're destined for the sword. His descendants will not be satisfied with bread. So it's not a good picture what he describes in these verses. Their wealth leaves. There's been a discussion in the past about wealth, and it basically pointing to, since Job's was all taken away from him, he must be a godless man or a wicked man. And Job countered with, there is prosperity among some, or at least for a while, but Job still agrees that it's short-lived. Like they don't get, at least in the end, they may be rich all the way to the end, but they don't get to take it with them. It doesn't buy them a better eternity. Um, and here he's showing even their descendants. I mean, it's hard to overcome your raising, as we call it here in the South. It's hard to overcome your raising. But you can. But we'd like to think that our parents had some wisdom that they could impart on us, and we learned lessons from them. So Job talks about the wicked. And then in 28, the first part of it, the first full paragraph, first 11 verses, Job, it's like he's diverting to another topic, but he's not. But what is the first paragraph about?
Men search diligently and find treasure under the earth. He
Okay.
finds it in places.
Yes. So to summarize that, we just call that mining, right? They're digging for treasure, they're mining underground, they're going in, and which is kind of interesting if you think about it, that even back in Job's times, they understood that digging into like caverns and digging under the ground, or digging deep, is where you would find treasures, whether it's we know about coal and things like that, but they're talking about like diamonds and precious jewels and stuff. But basically, this first full paragraph is about mining or digging and bringing hidden things out into the light, right? So that's what he's talking about, is bringing hidden things.
And that God can do that.
Right. Absolutely. Like he's talking about what men can do, but we know that there is no darkness with God. He can see into everything and he can bring these things to light. So he kind of sets the stage with a situation that they're all familiar with, which is that whole idea of mining or digging. And then in the second paragraph, which is 12 through 22, is he's talking about wisdom. And he talks about, so he's talked about wicked before. Now he's talking about wisdom, and he's asking where can it be found, and where's the place of understanding. Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. The deep says it's not in me. The sea says it's not in me. Pure gold cannot be given in exchange for it. You can't buy wisdom. Nor can silver be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir. So he goes a lot on it can't be bought. It can't be bought. The topaz of Ethiopia can't equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from? Where is the place of understanding? Now, we're realizing throughout this entire, all of these discourses, there has been this idea that the friends feel like they hold wisdom. They understand. They have the truth. And the one thing they don't know is what is it Job did. But they know he did something. He had to have, because he's suffering. And Job is saying, I didn't. Um, and if you recall, he started chapter 26 with, what counsel have you given to one without wisdom? So here he's again being a little bit exaggerated, hyperbolic, and saying, where does wisdom come from? But he's already said it cannot be found in the land of the living. It can be, but he's basically saying that's not where it comes from. Thus, it is hidden from all the eyes of all the living, and concealed from the birds of the sky. Abaddon, which is one of the places of the dead, Abaddon and death say, with our ears we have heard a report of it. So even those in their death place, place of the dead, have just heard a report of it. So he's basically kind of acting like wisdom and understanding can't be found. And it can't be bought. It's not in the land of the living. Um, Man doesn't know its value. So this is what he says. And then the last paragraph, 23 to 28, he answers himself. Where can it be found? Where does wisdom come from? 23 says, God understands its ways and he knows its place. So the answer is God. For he looks to the ends of the earth and he sees everything under the heavens. When he imparted weight to the wind and meted out the waters by measure, when he set a limit for the rain and a course for the thunderbolt, then he saw it and declared it. He established it. He also searched it out. And to man he said, here's the answer. Behold, the fear of the Lord is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. So wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And understanding is to depart from evil. But a lot of what Job is saying in that previous paragraph basically is we don't value this. We should. We would like to just go and buy it. I mean, right? Wouldn't we all like to just go and buy it? But we also know, we know that it takes work. It takes, I've often said, uh, knowledge puffs up. That's what the Bible tells us. But that's not saying don't gain knowledge. It's just saying be careful that you don't get puffed up thinking that you're so super smart or that you have this degree or this educational level or whatever. Don't get puffed up because unless you're applying that knowledge, you're never going to get to wisdom. And really, wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So if that knowledge takes you away from God, which is academia, right? Most of our colleges and universities around the country, many of which started as Christian universities, and very far from that now, like Princeton and Harvard and Yale, all of those started, I think, as seminaries, and they're nowhere near that now. But that knowledge, that education level, that gaining of knowledge has had caused many to walk away from God, and that leads to their destruction. But if we come back to wisdom is found in the fear of the Lord, and departing from evil is where understanding comes from. It's not just that we understand we should depart from evil, it's in the departing from evil, we will be gaining understanding. So Job puts it very clearly, starts out by saying, bring the hidden things to light, mining. We need to be mining for that wisdom. We need to be searching diligently for it. We need to be looking, where is it? Where is it? Where can it be found? And the answer is God knows where it is, and it's in Him. Starts and ends with God. And then in chapter 29, it says he took up his discourse. So I guess there was maybe some pause. Maybe he rested. Maybe he got a glass of water or something. But it says he again took up his discourse and said, oh, that I were in the months gone by and in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in the prime of my days, when the friendship of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. It's a very sad paragraph. He longs for times past. Who wouldn't, in his shoes, long for better days? He's in a really bad place. And a lot of times as I'm doing this, all I'm thinking of is this physical pain. But there's so much more. It was before that. When you think about the discussion between Satan and God, Satan pointed out that God had been protecting Job, had put a hedge of protection around him. He had blessed him greatly with stuff and with children, but also with good health. And God allowed all of that to be taken away. So, again, a question we need to ask ourselves is, would we worship God if we were in Job's situation? Or would we get angry with him and blame him? Would we be so caught up in our situation that we, and our feeling sorry for ourselves? Is Job feeling sorry for himself here, or is he just really looking back to better times?
I have had some times when everything fell apart and when it was completely drudgerous to go through life. When the days were before you opened your eyes, you started crying because you were still in your life, because it was still all bad and it was all. But I did have times when I thought, if I had only known that these were the good days, I would have been so much more thankful and I would have enjoyed them so much more. And I may have put something in those days that would have helped me later. But
Yeah.
I had no idea that those were the good days. But God has healed our family a lot, and we've come through a lot, even though there's a lot of remnants. But you know, I think we're getting back in the good old days again. So I'm very thankful.
That's I think sometimes some of these things, like what you just described of your situation, what you've heard me describe of mine, I hope it helps someone do exactly what you're saying, is to realize when things are good that you're in good times, right? And really, really, really appreciate and enjoy those times. Because, as you were talking, I just thought of our tendency, like as kids, we want to be a teenager. And as teenagers, we can't wait to get out on our own, get out from our parents' house, and not necessarily that it's a bad situation, but that we're looking forward to that independence, right? And then there was a trend a few years ago that I thought it was funny, and it was intending to be funny, but it was, this adulting thing is hard. When you have to, being an adult, like you have to pay your bills and you have to go to work and you have to, it's not all that when you were a kid or a teenager is all cracked up to be. You looked at adults and thought they get to do whatever they want. And it's like, rarely do you get to do any of what you want. But then you think about also when you have small children, like you have a baby, and that baby starts getting, and you love each milestone, but a lot of times we spend every part of our lives projecting into when it's going to be better, like, and when it's going to be whatever. When we're going to have more, when we're going to have less responsibility, or when that baby is not going to be so dependent on me. And then you watch them walk away from you. And I mean, literally a toddler. No, yeah, I'm talking about that. Like, and you kind of go, I remember after the first one, you realize like you're so excited when they start crawling. But with the second one, you're going, shoot, crawling means they're going to be everywhere. And things get harder. So we got to be careful. And that's something that I'm seeing a lot of people saying now is enjoy the moment. Enjoy the time you're in. Even if it's as bad as Job's is, there's something to enjoy. If sometimes all we're clawing onto or holding onto with the fingernails, because we don't have any other grip, is I'm still alive. I still have breath. I had a friend, I've used this several times. Some of you may have heard. We had a friend that we met over 20 years ago, closer to 30 years ago. And when I met her, first, she was just sitting in a kitchen chair at someone else's house where we were having a small group. But when she got ready to leave, her husband came and picked her up and carried her out. And I remember just like my jaw just dropped and I'm watching this happen. And after they left, the others explained that Anne had MS. And while we were in Illinois and knew her, so this is like 3 or so years, at times she would be able to use like a rolling walker and sort of walk. And then there were times when she couldn't do that. And then years later, they came here to visit us and she was not even capable of sitting up. Like when I knew her, she could drive with a modified vehicle. And she was really active. She had two young teen, and then older teen boys. And there were so many times I would be writing out a prayer request for Bible study, and I would just hear this whine, this, and I don't mean a person whine, but the whine of a motor. And I would think, what is that? And I would realize it was Anne's scooter. And I would stand there and say, I got out of bed today. I walked into the bathroom. I stepped and stood in the shower. I'm capable of all of that. What have I got to whine about? What have I got to complain about? But that doesn't take away that I might have had a prayer request. Don't get me wrong. But it starts putting things in perspective, right? And I've talked to Anne about this, and Anne's since passed, but I've talked to her about it because I didn't want to use her as like the, whipping boy, just like, well, Anne's got it so much worse, because I don't think Anne would have wanted that. But at the same time, Anne lived with such joy and such love of God. And I'll just never forget her hand raised in the church service while she sat in the pew because she couldn't stand up. And her hand wavered because she didn't have the strength to just hold it still. And I remember times our pastor going through talking about end times, and I would look at the back of Anne's head and think, she's going to fly. If she's in the rapture, she's since passed. But I thought if the rapture were to happen, Anne's going to fly through the air and those legs are going to work again. And she's going to be freed from this body that has her trapped because her brain worked. And it brought me a lot of joy. And I talked to Anne about that too. But at the same time, Anne was living before me, and I could see her joy. I could see her testimony. But I also realized as she told stories about when she was younger, when the boys were younger, I just looked at her and went, you were really active. She had been a teacher at one time, and then she stayed home with the boys, but she would gather all the kids in the neighborhood. They lived down in Charleston. She'd gather all the kids in the neighborhood and take them to the beach, and they'd get shells, and she'd do a science lesson with them or whatever, just being a teacher. And I thought, Anne used to walk. I mean, when you see somebody with a progressive disease like that, and I didn't see her when she was capable of walking, and then I saw a progression, ups and downs when I knew her, lived there and knew her. But, are we living that in the midst of our whatever pain and circumstances? Are we living with our hand raised to the Lord, even if it's shaking? As Jane was saying, even if the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is cry because our situation is overwhelming. God understands it's overwhelming, right? Jesus faced everything. We have a Savior that understands. And there's nothing that could ever happen to me that was worse than what happened to him. There's nothing. The hatred, the accusations, the physical pain they put him through,
because God's never going to turn his back on us.
absolutely.
You're never going to be on the cross and God looks away.
We don't ever have to fully take on our own sin, let alone the sin of everyone, and become sin for us. You're right. We don't have to face that. Jesus did that for us. And what an agony. But so is Job down? Yeah. Is Job raw and real here? Yeah. And like seeing how Jesus dealt with things correctly, we can look at Job, and when he's not wrong, we can know we have this freedom to talk about the bitterness of soul, or to talk about, better times. And because he goes on, when I went out to the gate of the city and took my seat in the square, you have to understand, he's talking about leadership in his city. If he's sitting at the gate of the city, that's where the leaders sat. That's where they tried cases. That's where they heard from the people and made decisions. And he took his seat in the square. He had a seat. He had a designated place. He had status. The young men saw me and hid themselves. The old men arose and stood. Look at his status here. The princes stopped talking and put their hands on the mouths. The voices of the nobles was hushed, and their tongues stuck to their palate. For when the ear heard, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw, it gave witness of me, because I delivered the poor who cried for help. And then the rest of this paragraph is literally a counter to what Eliphaz just had told him in his previous discourse of all the things that Job didn't do. Like you oppress the poor and all this stuff. He didn't. He did these things. And Job can say these things because they're true. And we can say things about ourselves, especially in countering the accusations. We can say, no, you don't have to go into great detail, but no, I give to the poor. I've served at this. I have, whatever your situation is. Not to build yourself up, but this is what's true. This is what's true, not what you've accused me of. I put on righteousness and it clothed me. My justice was like the robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, feet to the lame, father to the needy, investigated the case, which I did not know, and broke the jaws of the wicked and snatched the prey from its teeth. So I helped those that were being mistreated. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest. I shall multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and dew lies all night in my branches. Remember, this is poetic, but he's painting a picture here. My glory is ever new with me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. He's remembering what was and all that's been taken from him. And he says, the Lord took this. Whether he should say that or not, but he's still crediting God. To me, they listened and waited and kept silent for my counsel. After my words, they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them. And they waited for me as for the rain and opened their mouth as the spring rain. I smiled on them when they did not believe. And the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose a way for them and sat as chief and dwelt as king among the troops, as one who comforted the mourners. So he longs for these days. He was listened to. People stopped when he walked past. They came to him for counsel, and it blessed them. He was considered a blessing. That's Job. This is a wonderful description. It's sad Job has to be the one to say it. It's sad that not one of these three friends said these things about him. That's sad. None of us, I don't know, there's something no, I can't say none of us. Most people, we've kind of been taught from the cradle to not, speak too highly of yourself, like not toot your own horn. And there are just some situations where the only person that's going to is you. And if needed, you need to toot your horn. It might come like when Johnny was in the military and he was facing a rank advancement. He was facing a board for to maybe rise in rank. His bosses usually came to him and had him write his own OPR, which is Officer Performance Report, and he was struggle with it because he said, I feel like I'm having to say all these wonderful things about myself, and it felt wrong. It felt prideful, and it was a struggle. But he said, but if I don't, others are going to write things about themselves that probably aren't true, but I've got to at least represent what I have accomplished. And the reason the bosses would have them do it is because otherwise the boss is going to have to take time to go search their records and figure out what awards they'd gotten or what jobs they'd had, where the person usually knows that. And so it had to be given back to the boss, and the boss had to sign off on it. But it was tough. And I just remember Johnny saying, I don't like tooting my own horn, But in a situation like that, the only person that was going to is him. So he wasn't in a situation where he's being attacked necessarily.
My
Where,
husband, my
yeah,
husband calls it his I love me file. That's what
yeah,
he, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it feels icky, doesn't it? I mean, it's just hard. It's one thing to like journal things, right? Or just keep a running list of accomplishments. But when you're having to like sell yourself to somebody, to get a promotion or something, it's hard. It's hard, but it's necessary sometimes. And in Job's case, it's necessary because you remember he committed, he was not going to declare them right. He was not, no deceit was going to come out of his mouth. And I believe he's telling the truth about that. So when you listen to what he says about himself here, this is Job. This is who Job is. If we didn't understand all of this, because we didn't know all this, but if we didn't understand all this about Job, this is what we need to understand about Job. This is from where he's fallen. This is
But there's a
all
time,
what,
there's a time that can be worse than having to write your I love you file is when you're trying to get help for, I was trying to get help for my daughter, and you have to go to counselors. And of course, they believe the mom's always the problem, you
yes,
know,
yeah,
and you go with her, and the counselor is sitting there criticizing you and telling you who you are and who you should have been. And there's no way to prove who you are because the proof is sitting right there that something ain't right. And, you know,
yeah,
and you have to keep going to that person and paying that person and just sit there and take it. And nobody gets killed, but some people should get hurt.
or maybe at least defrocked or something. You're reminding me that in our situation with our son down in Florida, there was a man that was kind of the hinge pin for several things. And he was around our age, it sounded like, just kind of knowing. And he had been to seminary. He was an elder at a church, but he was elder in training. Like he had just gone through seminary later in life, like a second career kind of thing. He wasn't going to be the pastor, but he had done all that. So there was some money there for him to have left work, gone to seminary, paid for it, and been an elder at this church. But so she should have been a good person, you know, to deal with things. But at a point, he was told, and I mean, his head pastor told him to do this, right? And he was told to talk to both sets of parents. We're one of those sets of parents. Okay. Here we are 12, 13 years later. I've never had a conversation with a man. But do you know all kinds of things were said about me by this man and believed by the people down there? Johnny had two conversations with him. First one we were very encouraged by. The second one was where he told Johnny, I told your son he doesn't have to listen to you. Mm-hmm. And he's the man who made the infamous statement you may have heard me say that leave and cleave means the bride's parents get to choose when the couple is ready to get married. Which when his head pastor told me that, I said, that's not in the Bible. You know that. You've been to seminary. Show me. I've told this to other people. I've had pastors look at me and say, where did he get that? And I'm like, out of his own, sorry, butt, out of his own head. So I understand what you're saying. No, we didn't have to pay for it like you did. That would really burn. But to have these things said, and we've got some of them in writing, things said about us, and and our son is agreeing with all this, or we even asked him, why would they say those things? Did you tell them those things? And he's like, well, yeah, yeah, okay. Our son was afraid of us. And I went through, there's another part of this where Job is asking all these questions, and I'm sitting here going, that's what I did. I was like, When did we, did I ever withhold anything from you? Did I ever beat you? All the things I came up with, I don't know, 10, whatever, off the top of my head, that would be reasons for someone to be afraid. And he said no to all of them. I said, you're not afraid of us. But it got him what he wanted to say it. And it's what his then girlfriend, now wife, used all her life to get what she needed and wanted, which was to say somebody was mean to her or she was afraid of them. And her dad said this to us in the one conversation we had with him. And I said, you realize your daughter stood in my home and said she was afraid of you. But you know what we didn't do? We didn't take action on it because she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid she wasn't going to get what she wanted. And he was putting up some roadblocks. Eventually, he gave her what she wanted. But anyway, yeah. So
Well, one other thing is that it gets so hard. I mean, my daughter had not eaten a bite of food in 21 days. And I called her counselor with me on speaker. And all the counselor could say is, I can't talk to you. I can't talk to you. And I said, my daughter's name, do you give me permission to speak to her? And yeah. So then after 21 days of not eating a bite, nothing, the counselor said, give her another chance. Just let her eat on her own time. I said, no, I have a place I'm going to send her. And if she doesn't eat by tomorrow, she's not going to be in my house anymore.
Yeah.
But, here's the counselor that we're paying,
Right.
won't talk to me. I know more than the counselor knows.
Right.
24/7 watching this kid.
Right.
And she knows more than me.
Right.
And
I will say that again, I'm seeing these trends, and most of this is like through social media, but there are full-on counselors out there counseling these kids, young people, they're adults usually, to cancel their parents, to cut them off completely, go radio silent, and then these counselors for these kids get on social media, and there was a statement you made a minute ago, it's always the parents' fault. And there's others that are countering it and saying, no, it's not always the parents' fault, but it's usually a few parents. And some of them are gaining some traction, but they get blasted. It's like, oh, there's no I wonder your daughter, one of them, she was on yesterday going, if you voted for Trump, it's no wonder I would cancel you too. It's like, okay, so and I don't care if you voted for Trump or not. That's not really the point. That was the point of that statement. The point this lady countered with is, oh, so you get to tell me how to vote. And if I don't vote, so I said this during the election when that was being said, is we're not going to go to Thanksgiving because they're going to vote a certain way. We're not going to go to Christmas. We're going to cut them off completely because they won't vote the way I want them to vote. And I'm like, okay, so next election, do you get to tell me? And at the state level elections, do you get to tell me then too? And so I have to vote the way you want me to vote for the rest of the life for you to be in my life. This, if we turn that and said you have to vote the way I tell you to vote, they'd scream, right? So we're living in some times. Obviously, Job was too, but we're living in some times where there's some sick stuff going on out there. And I'm sorry. I'm glad you're opening up. I'm glad it's not just me, because sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that's having to deal with any of this. And that would be okay too, because Job's the only one who had to deal with his situation. But in in chapter 30, it starts with the word but. So it's a contrast. Here he's given this whole in 29 what his situation was like. Now he's saying, but now those younger than I mock me. Before, the younger wouldn't even look at him because, they hid themselves. Whose fathers I disdain to put with the dogs of my flock. So it's a tough statement. Indeed, what was good Indeed, what good was the strength of their hands to me? Vigor has perished from them. For want and famine they are gaunt, who gnaw the dry ground by night in waste and desolation, who pluck mallow. So he goes on and describes these people basically aren't pulling their weight. Um, and then in verse 8, he said, fools, even those without a name, they were scourged from the land. I made the point earlier, foolishly and fools are not two totally different things, because fools are foolish, but all of us can be foolish, but a fool is a title. It is a designation, and it's severe. But here he's saying, longs for these days, and then it's but now, dot, 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 but now. He's being mocked. And in 9, he says, and now I have become their taunt. I have even become a byword to them. Byword is something we've heard before about Job saying he's become a byword. It's not a good thing. Becoming a byword is not a good thing. They abhor me and stand aloof from me. They don't refrain from spitting at my face. So, one of the things that you can get from this is either he's been in his house, not going anywhere, and he just assumes all this is happening, but he's speaking to it as if it's actually happening. So I'm thinking time has passed and Job has actually faced people. And in facing people, this is the derision he's getting. He's being spit in on his face. Were you going to say something, Jane? Um, he because he, God, has loosed his bowstring and afflicted me. They have cast off the bridle before me. On the right hand their brood arises. They thrust aside my feet. It goes on. Um, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud, is the last thing he says in that paragraph. So there is, but now he's been mocked, taunted, abhorred, which is hated. Just you can write down any of these descriptions, spat on, become a byword. Um, and then in the last paragraph, I'm not sorry, not last paragraph, next paragraph, C is the next paragraph is 16 to 23. He says, my soul, it's another and now, my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have seized me. And he credits this affliction as coming from God, as we've already seen. At night, it pierces my bones within me. So he describes all of this. I cry out to you, to God, for help, but you don't answer me. I stand up and you don't turn their attention against me. Thou hast been cruel to me, and the might of your hand you persecute me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride, and you to dissolve me in the storm. For I know you will bring me to death and to the house of meeting for all the living. So he's in the days of affliction. He believes this is by the hand of God. And he feels alone. He feels abandoned. He feels God's not answering him. And in the sense of he's not hearing from God right now in the moment, he doesn't understand this. We get that. And then in 24 to 31, he mourns over these days of affliction. He said he's wept for the one whose life is so hard. Was not my soul grieved for the needy? So in the past, Job did that for people who were hurting. He grieved for them. He said, but when I expected good, evil came. When I waited for light, darkness came. I'm seething within and cannot relax. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning without comfort, and I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I've become a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black on me, and my bones burn with fever. When you've got an ache that goes all the way to the bone, that is very painful. My harp is turned to mourning. So he's in days of affliction and he's mourning. We knew he was grieving. We've known that. He grieved the loss of his children, the loss of everything. He is the descriptions, bitterness of soul. the um, we would say he's depressed. He's in a dark, deep, emotional, bad place. Um, and he attributes these days of affliction to God, but he's also lost that status. He's lost his voice. He's lost his position. He's lost, the respect of people. I mean, it is a full swing. It's not just lost. He's fully swung over to being taunted, being hated, being spit upon. And this is something, folks, happens in Christianity. It happens. You see, if someone is going through a really bad time, people pull away. Rarely, you think about, I think about this, but we've heard a lot about first responders. That was the term that kind of came up after 9/11. For me, is one of the first times you just heard a lot about first responders. There are people, and sometimes it's portrayed in a movie, sometimes it's portrayed on a show. There are people that if an explosion goes off or if a fire starts, they run away. And then you've got those people that run towards, right? I might not be trained to be a first responder. Like I'm not going to be able to go and ambulance wise save somebody's life. I'm not a paramedic. I'm not trained in that. And I'm not a firefighter. I don't have a fire truck. I don't have a fire hose or that kind of thing. But there's still, in a situation like this, like where Job is, are we running towards a Job? Or are we pulling away? And it's one thing to pull away, it's another thing to spit on the way past. These people are really digging in. Um, and we've seen Job's friends added to his pain rather than relieving any of it. He just begged at times for them to just listen. Will you just listen to me? And when you go back and you look at chapter 29 and realize how much Job was listened to, I'm at my age, I'm 62. Um, I remember back when I was 30, 32, just starting to really study hard and learn my Bible, and I was leading studies. And we were active and I was doing Sunday schools, leading Bible studies, was doing Awana at times, on and on. But here at 62, I mean, thankfully y'all show up, but I'm finding that Johnny and I are being put on a shelf. Instead of seeing that we have age and wisdom, they're looking to the 30-year-olds. And it's just kind of a weird situation. I thought at this point in time we'd have more time and could do more ministry, but we're basically being patted on the head and told, we would like you to bring food for a fellowship, or, you can take your turn and take care of the kids, but not lead studies, not make decisions, and it's a weird place to be. And I'm thinking back to when I was in my 30s, I was always looking to people that were at least 10 or more years older than me that knew more than I did and who were parenting, beyond me. And I wanted to know how they were parenting. I was always looking for that, right? Not feeling like I could ask everybody to take the time to mentor me, but I'd have a conversation with them, and I would watch them and ask questions and serve alongside them and learn. And I would take leadership positions. I've always done that, but I don't, I don't see that happening now. I don't see our generation being valued for our age and wisdom. I see us being, and then I also look and see who shows up, who's doing the work, who do they count on? It's us. But they want us to do that kind of stuff. And it's sad. It's strange. So anyway, here's Job. And then in chapter 31, and we do need to finish, it says Job makes these I have or if I statements, right? There's a lot of if I statements in this chapter. But he starts out with, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Covenant is a very strong term. Those of you who've studied covenant, some of you have studied covenant with me, I will say of all the courses, covenant is probably the one course I'll say every Christian needs to take. If you haven't taken it, you should. Maybe I'll repeat it, but I've done it probably 4 or 5 times. It is the basis by which God deals with us. The law is a covenant. It's a temporary covenant. The new covenant that Christ inaugurated in his flesh, everything is so important. A covenant is a solemn binding agreement that if you're making it between you and another person, the only way you get out of it is death. So marriage is a covenant. I know that sounds so drastic to say the only way out is death, but we know God made it such that this was until death do you part. You are free once your partner dies, but we were not to get divorces. And it breaks the picture of Christ in the church and all. I'm not trying to beat anybody up, just saying that if you didn't understand that now, understand it. It's that serious. So when Job said, I made a covenant with my eyes, he's not making a light statement. He's saying, I have told my eyes, I am in such self-control that I would not gaze at a virgin. I will avert my eyes. I've heard men take this and say they train their sons that to have a word, if they're walking along, that one of them might say, eyes right, because something's on the left that they don't need to see. This would be a covenant with your eyes would include not looking at porn, not viewing things on television or anywhere else that you shouldn't be seeing, not reading or looking at pictures or anything else. But anyway, he made a covenant with his eyes that he would not gaze at a virgin. And what is the portion of God from above, or the heritage of the Almighty from on high? Is it not calamity to the unjust and disaster to those who work iniquity? Does he not see my ways and the number of all my steps? And the answer to this is yes, he does. God sees his ways and the number of his steps. The hairs on our head, he knows the number of. Then there's these if statements. If I have walked with falsehood and my feet has hastened after deceit, then he says, then let God do these things. If my heart was enticed by a woman, or I've lurked at my neighbor's doorway, may my wife grind for another. This is very graphic terminology. May my wife grind for another and let others kneel down over her. In other words, let somebody else sleep with my wife. Let somebody have sex with my wife. For they would be, for that would be, he's talking about it being enticed by a woman. That would be a lustful crime. It would be an iniquity punishable by judges. For it would be fire that consumes a bad, and it would uproot all my increase. So Job is saying, I've made a covenant with my eyes. I've made this promise that I won't do this. And then he's like, if I have walked in falsehood, God should do this to me. If I have been enticed by a woman or have lurked at my neighbor's doorway, that would be his neighbor's wife, then this should happen. If I have despised the claim of my male or female slaves when they filed a complaint against me, any master could ignore this. And Job had slaves, so servants, slaves or servants. He had those, and he's saying they should be able to bring a claim against me. And he said, what then could I do when God arises? And when he calls me to account, what will I answer him? And then he goes on and he says in 16, if I have kept the poor from their desire or caused the eyes of the widow to fail. So here he talks about the widow, the orphan, the poor, the needy, somebody without clothing, someone who needs to be warm. He talks about all of those. And if he has not taken care of them, then calamity and terror should happen. Okay. Then in 24 to 28, he says, if I have confidence in gold. Now, if you think about all the things Job is saying, if I've done this, if I've done that, he's been accused of all of this. He's been accused of counting on his monies. He's been accused of not taking care of the orphan, the widow, the poor, the needy, the one who had needed clothes or needed to be warm. He's been accused of not taking care of them. He has been accused of having that confidence in gold, as I've already said. He hasn't necessarily been accused of not hearing the complaint of a slave, but it would fall in line. Job is thinking about all the things. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like this, Jane? You were describing like where you're talking to a counselor and I'm going, if I did, it's what I said to my. This is where I thought about when I said to my son that time, did I ever do this? Did I ever do that? Did I ever, or we, it was both of us. And he kept saying, no, no, no. I said, you can come up with something. Tell me what we did. If I didn't cover it, tell me what it is. And he wouldn't say anything. I said, you're saying you're afraid of us? You're sitting across the table from me. You're not afraid of me. But he held firm and he told people down in Florida, yes, I'm afraid of my parents because it got them what they wanted. It got all these people to say, we have to protect your son from you. And they said those things to us. They're stupid, but they said those things to us. And he goes, he talks in 29 and saying, if I, but he says, have I rejoiced at the extinction of my enemy or exalted when evil befell him? Because we had a situation one time where this general took direct action to try to get to thwart my husband's career. I mean, he took direct action and it didn't work, thankfully. But sometime after this, like within the year after this, I found out that that general had been basically dismissed from the Air Force. And I could have gotten excited. I could have said, well, good. He got what he deserved. But for whatever reason, God's Holy Spirit, and that's all it was, it wasn't me, put on me a concern for this man, and I started praying he wouldn't commit suicide. Because that's all the man had. He had destroyed his family. He had destroyed everything in his bid for power. Sorry, most generals have sold out long ago to get to the position they're in. Even colonels. Colonels and generals today in the service are basically, it's a political thing, more so than actual merit. So these Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're all being fired. I'm not sorry. They probably all should be fired. But anyway, with that general, I literally just started praying for him because I thought he could commit suicide. He's lost everything. He didn't commit suicide as far as I know, but he did lose whatever. He would have gotten retirement. So that would be, he didn't lose all his money or anything. But I didn't rejoice in the extinction of my enemy or exalt when evil befell him. And then it talks about, I have not allowed my mouth to sin or no, I have not. So he gives these have I's and then I have nots. Have men of my tent not said, who can find one who's not been satisfied with meat? So he takes care of the people in his household. The alien, so here, before it was widows and orphans and people in need, here he's talking about those in his household, his enemies, aliens lodging, travelers needing a place to stay. He has not covered or hidden his own transgressions or iniquities. And then he makes kind of a demanding statement, let the Almighty answer me. This is where Job gets to the edge. And because he's making these demands, like as if now all these things could be true and are true of Job. He knows that God knows the truth, but we still don't have a place where we can say, to make that demand of God. You have to give me an answer for why things are happening. We can ask him, but not this this looks like a demand to me. And that's not good. The very last sentence of this entire thing is the words of Job are ended. He has spoken. He spoke for the last 6 chapters or 5 chapters, whatever it is. And I think it's 6. And he's going to stop. Okay. So next week we will look at a new guy named Elihu. We'll find some things out about him, which, like the others, there's very little we're going to know about him from any kind of records or from the Bible itself or anything else. But we're going to learn about him by what he says. We're going to learn about what he says, what is said about him, and we're going to hear from him. So this is going to be another one. This is not Job. He did not hear the conversation between God and Satan. And we're going to see if Elihu's right or if Elihu's wrong, or sometimes it might be both. He could be right and wrong. Just like the friends, they weren't always wrong in what they said, but they were wrong in how they were right many times. So, and they were wrong in what they said sometimes too. So we'll see what he has to say. We've got 2 more lessons. The last one will definitely bring things to a conclusion, and we'll hear from God himself. So while I guess in my mind this week, I know this is coming. So I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you had this situation like Jane's describing with this counselor? Wouldn't it be great if all of a sudden God showed up and told her off? Or stood for you or whatever. Well, when it happens, let's see who God addresses first and see if that's what we would be demanding, because that's kind of what Job is doing, is demanding this answer from God. How would we handle it if God showed up like that? So be careful what you're demanding and what you're asking for. So we will end this, do your lesson, and Lord willing, come back next week. In 2 more weeks, we'll be done. This has been somewhat gratifying to me to hear some of what Job is going through, because there are some parallels to what I'm going through, what sounds like Jane, maybe others. It may not be something you're going through now. Maybe there's been something in your past, but mainly, if I keep saying if nothing else, but how others are going through. I have said this before, it does happen in Christianity, where not only do people pull away, but there is the same mentality that the friends have, and that is, you must have done something for this to be happening to you. And none of us are perfect, and I say all those things. I don't mean them flippantly, but that doesn't mean that what we're going through was based on something we did. We all have our issues that we need to, and sins that we need to deal with. But how do we deal with people? Instead, could we not look at them and not know and not proclaim they're in the wrong, just because it's not happening to you? That's what I think would be better. So we learn from that. Hopefully you're keeping up with your list of things you're learning about how to deal with someone who's suffering. I'm not as good at keeping up with that list myself, by the way. I forget to write those things down. But we'll pray and then we'll come back and watch the video. Father in heaven, this was a better week, in my opinion, to listen to the things that Job said, to understand him better, to understand, who he was, what he was like. I really feel it's sad that he's the one that had to speak up for himself rather than someone else saying not I love me, but let me tell you about Job. We have this. Someone wrote it down, and they're writing these things about Job, but even then, Job, still in his bitterness of soul and his lack of understanding, and as an example for us, as something for us to learn from, Job is pouring it out, and he's so very raw and honest. And what is wonderful about that is that we can learn, but there's also that, oof, Job, you kind of went a little too far on that one. And God's going to answer that. So we will see. We need to learn from that. But we also need just to hear where Job is, and we can relate and understand why he's in so much pain. So we're learning, Father, and that's the whole point of all this. Help us in our own situations. Help us as we're going to hopefully be able to help someone else go through a really bad time, that we're not going to jump to conclusions or decide or judge and think that we're right. Because if we don't know, we don't know, but you do. And you're who we need to be turning to. For what Job asked the question, where can wisdom and understanding be found? It's found in fear of you, and it's found from departing from evil. Things that we know are true of Job. We know they're true of Job because you said them about him. So let us be counted as Job, having things like that said about us and being able to endure through something, whatever it is, like Job is enduring, not knowing there's going to be an end, because he doesn't, other than death, he doesn't know that there is an end. And we know a little bit more of the rest of the story. So be with us this week as we study. Bring us back next week, in the next 2 weeks, as we finish up this book, and be with us as we listen to David and what he has to say this week as well. We thank you for everything and ask for it in Jesus' name. Amen.